so if we're talking data analysis, if I just say data analysis, what do you think data analysis is? What do you think we're going to be doing? Katie? Looking at data. Okay, so what is data? Edgar? Okay, so information. I'll go with that. So, okay, so we're going to be looking at, and I'm going to put in the word factual information, hopefully. Okay, so we're going to be looking at factual information and doing what with it? Yeah, what is it to analyze data? What does that mean?
To visualize.
To what?
Visualize.
We could represent it by visualizing, but like, go deeper with that. What does it mean when we're analyzing it?
Observe.
To tell us what? Say it again.
To understand it.
Okay, so yes, to understand it. Okay, but we want to be able to like look at factual information that we can then use. I'm always trying to think of the list and the words in one. To reason with, to make calculations with, to make decisions about it, about something, whatever it's over. To know if it's useful or not. I mean, I can collect data about the temperature outside on a daily basis, but that doesn't mean that I'm able to be a meteorologist and make those future predictions, right? So there's this idea of getting this factual information, looking into it deeper to have a better understanding of it, so that we can use it to reason, to make calculations, to make predictions, to make decisions. And whether you know it or not, most of my students don't even realize until we start discussing this more, you are constantly in your brain analyzing data. You're constantly getting input and output happening. Even if it's just, I said something, my teacher had a funny look on their face, it made me go, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have asked that. Right? Because you've learned in the past when someone makes that face, that means, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about, right? Or they're mad, or whatever. It doesn't mean you're always right, but that's just how we react to things that we've learned from seeing it multiple times. Does that make sense? Okay, so in what ways do you think you see or have data happening in your lives right now, on a daily basis? How and when do you see data? Habiba?
COVID-19.
Oh, yes, this is the glorious one. Why are we all sitting here in masks? Because the data shows if we wear masks, it helps reduce COVID. Right? I'm not sure my daughter's teacher doesn't wear masks, and that's a whole other issue. Where else do we see data in our lives? Edgar?
On our phones.
How?
Footsteps.
Do what? Oh, okay, so like, how many of you have like an activity tracker? Okay, that's definitely data, very math data. I'm surprised I'm not hearing this one. It was all the talk. How many of you watched the football games over the weekend? Oh, I don't have a lot of football people in here. Ava back there is like maybe. Okay, so, right, we see data related to sports. Now, these are very numerical types of data. How do you have social media? Right, we all have social media. What ways do we see data on social media? How are you seeing it thrown at you all the time? Lily?
Sometimes you can like see the ratio of like people who view your story versus like click on a link you post.
Okay, so right, we get numerical feedback, stats, data back of, okay, someone posted a comment, lots of people liked it, that must be cool or popular, or I want to do something like that. Okay, but we also get other types of data thrown at us. How many of us see those the data on social media that's just like the comments that say something like, students who are on their screens more are less successful at school. Do you see those types of things, right? And those articles go flying by? That's data. Okay, how do you use data here at school?
Like paying attention, doing your work, leads to better grades.
Okay, so just in general, the basic feedback that we see of, I noticed when I studied, I did better on a test. I noticed when I stayed caught up with my homework, I did better in class, right? So those basic, I don't know if it's student, teacher, whatever, school feedback type of things. Any video game players? Right, video games, aren't you getting data all the time in video games? Right, we see stats. You guys aren't as aware of the data around you, apparently. My classes normally make a big long list, but that's okay, we'll talk about it. So all these different ways that we're seeing and having data around us, okay, that data doesn't always get collected or presented in the same way. So we want to talk about some different ways that we can have data. One way that we can get data is the world that you live in the most. You want to figure out something. You want to learn about, oh gosh, a debate class, and you're trying to put together, decide that if you're 16, you should be able to vote. What are you going to do? Yep, you're going to Google it, right? And you're not going to try and collect data on your own. You're going to see what other data people have collected. Okay, so what you guys are most familiar with in your world is using data that already exists. Okay, we're going to talk about this a lot this week, but data always comes with pros and cons. Yes, Sydney? Yes, go quickly. If we are talking about pre-existing data, and we Google it, how many results are we going to get?
A lot.
A lot. So what are you going to do? Just read the first one and check, call it good? Probably not, right? What should we probably do?
Look at multiple.
Right? Look at multiple, see if they're reliable sources, see where it's coming from, see what it tells us, right? So we have to do some sifting when we're pulling from data. Is it good? Is it bad? What does it mean? What does it tell us? Okay, so pros and cons, but that's what we use a lot of in our world today. You guys have like the world at your fingertips. Do you know what I had to do when I was your age? If I wanted to get information, what did I have to do? I had to go to the library. You guys don't even know what like microfilm is or microfiche. Have you ever heard of that? No, I had to like read past articles and like look in journals. I couldn't just get access to the journal online. I didn't even have internet in my house growing up. Can you imagine that? I was like, oh my gosh, I lived in a different world than you all. Another way that we can collect data is by doing something like an observational study. Okay, so you aren't sports people. I won't use that example. I want to know. Well, gosh, you guys are throwing me off because I don't have an, if I can't use my sports example. I want to know how many people at Westfield High School have blonde hair. Right? I could probably just walk around the school or stand at the front doors and check off how many people have blonde hair, right? I can just kind of watch with my eyeballs and make some tally marks. Okay, a football game is played, someone just keeps tracks of what happens. We're not changing anything, we're not manipulating anything. Okay, we're just keeping track of what we notice. Okay, this can be data that turns into numerical data like football stats, or it could be data that turns into how you want to act around your teacher in class. I know if I forget my homework, my teacher's going to be really mad at me. Okay, I know if I raise my hands and I ask a question when the teacher already said it, their reaction isn't going to be very positive. Whatever. It's not necessarily that, right? It could be different. But that's because we have observed from past situations what that reaction has been and then how we want to act in response. Okay, questions on an observational study. Okay, the next type of data, which I thought maybe this is one that would come up more likely, but it didn't. I mean, you do experiments in science class, right? Right, so experiments, what's an experiment? What do you do when you do an experiment in science class? Anissa?
You collect data from the results.
Okay, so one of the experiments that you've done, it's hard to put these in words, right? One of the experiments I think you guys have done, depending on when you have science class, have we done the one where we tape the markers on the floor and then we use the car and we time it? Some of us are saying yes, some of us are saying no. Did you just do it once? No. You did it a lot of times. Why do you do it a lot of times?
So you get different.
Right? You're kind of seeing what happens based on X, Y, Z. If I do X, what is my outcome Y? Okay, so an experiment is where we're actually changing something to see what the outcome is, right? We're manipulating something to see the outcome. Okay, I do this all the time in my classes when I'm teaching. I teach something first period. Oh, that didn't work well. My students don't know what they're doing. Let me try something else in second period. Okay, that went better. So that's how I need to be teaching. If I do X, they don't understand. If I do Y, they do, so I'm going to stick to Y. Now, again, I'm kind of picking basic general examples, right? But in an experiment, what happens if I add more of something? What happens if I, right? So COVID-19 vaccines. They did an experiment. They found out they had this vaccine that works. They had a vaccine and we had to wait for a while before we could actually get it. Because we now need to make sure that when we made that change and it worked, it doesn't have any other side effects because it's never been done before. So yes, we're messing around and manipulating with something, but we need to kind of test it a little bit more to make sure it's okay. Okay. The last way that we can talk about collecting data, well, there's lots of ways, we're just looking at 4, okay, is by doing some type of survey. You see these things all the time on social media. I'm going to pick a generic dumb one. Answer these questions and see what Harry Potter house you fall into. Right? Answer these questions and we'll tell you what words describe you best. How many of you filled those out before, right? We've done those types of things. We see them. What is a survey then? Right? So we ask some questions, we get some results. So a survey is sort of a ask and respond. Now, we're going to give this even a more specific. When we're doing a survey and we're asking these questions, most of the time, we're going to be using this in a sample method. Okay, so here's the next catch that comes with talking about data. There's going to be conversations that come up that my students think are awkward. I'm not really sure why my students think are awkward. For some reason, somewhere in the process, we've decided that talking about some of these things shouldn't happen. I don't know why, but like we're going to have to talk about ethnicity, demographics, diversity, socioeconomic status. Those are all things that affect data. Okay, so I always remind my students that we all react differently, and sometimes when something feels awkward, a student laughs because who are you? Who's the person who laughs when it's awkward? Right? We all kind of have, so just don't take it personally if someone's giggling in response, because sometimes it's awkward. We'll just get ourselves together and move on. It's fine. So the key here is that we now know there's all these different ways that we can collect data. Okay? But we need to really talk about the pros and cons of things that we need to consider. And this is where it becomes a little bit more of an art than it does a science. And that's the piece where it makes my students really uncomfortable in math class. But wait a minute, Mrs. McKinney, you're not just telling me I can just do this and getting it. No. Okay, you have to start to sort of really think critically and start to think outside the box a little bit. So, if I just ask you the general question, what is the most common eye color in the world?
Brown.
My students say brown. Why is it brown?
I don't know. I've seen a lot of people with brown eyes.
Why?
It's a dominant gene.
Okay, so it is a dominant gene. We do know that. Okay, so does anybody know about how many people in the world have brown eyes? How could we find out? Google it. Let's Google it. So let's see what we get. See what we find out. Okay, so here's what we get. Okay, so we have this data. How did they find out this number up here on a quick Google? Right down here it gives us a little bit more leeway, but let's just say 79. How did we find out that 79% of people in the world have brown eyes? Trey?
So I can see two ways they went about this.
Okay.
They either put out a survey and were like, do you have brown eyes or do you not have brown eyes?
Okay.
They got multiple groups of people and then found out how many of those have brown eyes and then said roughly this many people.
Okay, so how many people are there in the world?
7.8 billion, I think?
Yeah, we're getting close to 8 billion people. Do we think that they asked 8 billion people what color their eyes were? No. Okay, so let's go through our options here. We didn't ask 8 billion people. That's not a possibility. So, did we, the people who originally collected it, did the people who originally collect this use pre-existing data? Nope, because they originally collected it. Did they do an observational study? Okay, so let's say I want to figure out eye color. Brown. Who's doing that? That's a little bit creepy, right? Probably not doing that. Okay, nope, that seems a little bit ridiculous. Did we?
This is Mrs. McCurry. Could I have Trey to the main office for just a moment?
Yep, I will send him.
Thank you.
Did they do an experiment and try and change people's eye color? Nope, not gonna do that. So we did a survey. Okay. Here you go, Trey.
Should I take my stuff?
They said just for a moment, so maybe there's just something for you to pick up. I don't know. They have something to give you. I don't know.
Where is the main office?
Just downstairs. You know where the main doors are by the flag?
Yeah.
Like where that's where it is.
Alright, cool.
Okay, so most likely they did a survey. Okay, so out of 7.58 billion people, whatever, how many people do we think would be reasonable to ask? You guys tell me. It's your decision. A few thousand? 8 billion? A very little amount. Lily, what do you think?
Maybe like 3 different groups of 1 million.
Okay, so maybe 3 million? Do we think 3 million is enough? I don't know. I don't have a perfect answer. That's annoying in here, right? There's not a perfect answer. Okay? Yes, Lily?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've always wondered this. What if the group they interviewed, like let's say it was just a group and it was a survey about those. What if there's a group of like people that just like all have blue eyes?
Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So those are great questions to be asking. Okay, so we get however many people we decide we want to ask. I don't know what the perfect answer is all the time. We don't want it to be, if it's 100 people, 1 person. Okay, if it's 7 billion people, 1,000 probably isn't enough. I mean, I don't know, maybe we asked 1 billion people. I don't know. Okay, but we send out this survey and we collect data. And once we cross that bridge, we go, okay, we asked enough people that that's got to be the same trend that we see across the world. Now, it's not going to be perfect, right? When we looked at this data, we saw a range. We don't know exactly, but we have this range. Okay, so let's now talk on numbers that seem a little bit more realistic. So let's talk about Westfield High School. Okay, let's talk Westfield High School and say we want to know the most common eye color at Westfield High School. So there's about 3,000 students at Westfield High School. How many students do we think would be reasonable to survey out of 3,000? What do you say, Lily?
I would say 3,000 because I feel like it's a reasonable number.
Yeah, but you're going to run into the dilemma that you can't get everybody to respond. Someone's sick. Someone says no thank you. Okay, so what do you say, Sydney?
I'd say like 500 or 600 people.
500-600 people? I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't know. I can also see Lily's side of maybe we could get more like 15. There isn't a perfect answer. So let's say we do 600 people. Okay, we surveyed 600 people here at Westfield High School and we learned that 50% of our students have brown eyes. Okay, so in that sample survey of those 700 people, 50% had brown eyes. Would it then be reasonable for us to say, okay, so about 50% of students at all of Westfield have brown eyes? I mean, that's a pretty fair guess. What is that called when we say, okay, here's what we learned from the data, now we want to apply that to everyone? What's that called? Do we know? You learned it in science class. What's the word inference mean? Okay, so a hypothesis is kind of the guess before we do the research.
Reasonable guess?
Right? The inference is, here we have some info. What does that info then mean we can probably reasonably say? It's our sort of educated guess. We know some info, so we can then make a guess about it. Okay, so an inference is sort of the best conclusion that we can come to. Out of 700 students asked at Westfield High School, 50% of them had brown eyes. So my educated guess is that then 50% of students at Westfield High School have brown eyes. It might not be perfect, but it's a lot better than me just making up a random number. Okay, so now let's get to Lily's question that I kind of avoided and said those were good questions to ask. I collect my 700 students to ask, and when I collect those students, what happens if... Okay, well, I don't want to give you that info right away. The collection of students that I asked, we're going to go in reverse because I don't want to give this away for you, is my sample. Okay, so the sample are the people who get asked. It doesn't have to be people. I don't know, maybe we're doing dog fur color, right? Then it's dogs. Maybe we're, I mean, whatever, right? Okay, so how are we going to get those 700 people to ask? What 700 people at Westfield High School are we going to decide to ask? do we decide who to ask? There's not a right or wrong answer here. What do you want to do to get 700 people, Lily?
I feel like there's a word for it where you get like a variety of, like, it's students, so you don't want to do all girls.
Okay,
You
so
want a variety.
I don't know if it, yeah, okay, so when we randomly select, we tend to get a variety of people in our sample. Just hang on to that. Okay, so random means that everyone in the whole large group has a fair chance of being surveyed. Okay, it doesn't guarantee, but it usually helps us sort of weed out some other things that are going to happen. Because the reality is, wouldn't it also probably be okay if I just stood outside my door and just asked the first 700 people that walked by? Now, that's not random, because everyone at Westfield High School doesn't walk by my door. What types of students walk past my door? Math students. But is a student being in math really going to have an effect on eye color? No, so it's not random. But I'm not, it's not bad either. Okay, so let's just decide we randomly, so we put every single student ID number into a hat and we pull out 700 of them. That's a random sample, right? So we're going to have 700 people there and we're going to go ask them. Okay? So now let me ask you this. Lily, what color are your eyes?
Green.
What color are your family members' eyes?
Green. Blue, blue, blue.
Okay. Lacey, what color are your eyes?
Blue.
What color are your family member eyes?
Blue and then brown.
Okay. Anissa, what color are your eyes? What color are your family members' eyes? Edgar, what color are your eyes?
Brown.
What color are your family members' eyes?
Brown.
Okay, so brown, 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 blue, green, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. I'm a blue, green, blue, green. Okay. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So we collect this data, we say Westfield High School, about 50% of our students have brown eyes. Do we think we could then say that about 50% of students at Carmel High School would be a good guess of how many people have brown eyes?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe. Okay, let me take that a step further. What if I say my guess is that 50% of students in Indianapolis Public Schools have brown eyes? Sydney went straight to a no. Why are you going straight to a no, Sydney?
Well, there's different ethnic buildup.
Okay, right, so this is where it's sort of like the awkward, but I'm just going to put it out there. Westfield High School is a bunch of white people.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, right, there's the giggles, I know, right? But it's true. It's true. We have a lot of white people. Okay, demographically, if we are doing our breakdown, we are like 80% Caucasian. Okay, Carmel is going to have a very similar breakdown. Indianapolis Public Schools is not. They're going to have a lot more people of color. Is it surprising that Anissa has brown eyes and her family has brown eyes? Or that Edgar has brown eyes and his family has brown eyes? I know, and there's the giggle, right? Right? It's really awkward, I know. Why is that? Ethnicity. Our skin color is linked to our eye color. It's genetically how it works. Okay? I am like, this is me tan. I am just not going to tan. It's the world that I live in. I know it. Right? How's tanning go for you, Lacey?
Okay.
It's okay. How about you, Lily?
No.
I mean, right. How about you, Anissa? You don't even have to think about it, right? It's like, oh, look at that, right? It's just the way it is. Okay? And we all go, oh, but can I really talk about that? But we have to. Because it has an effect on the data and what's reasonable to use. While we might not know exactly Carmel's breakdown, if we know Westfield's breakdown, we can probably make a good prediction about Carmel's breakdown because they have a similar breakdown of subgroups. Okay, that's what makes something a good sample. If I take a random sample here of 700 students at Westfield High School and I get all white kids with blonde hair, that's probably not going to be a good sample. Now, statistically speaking, that's almost impossible to happen. Okay, but if it did, that would be a bad sample. A good sample means that our sample is sort of a mini version of the big. Oops, mini version. Which means we are considering things like ethnicity, socioeconomic status. What's socioeconomic status? Do we know what that means? Income, money. We are maybe considering things like religious beliefs. Okay, if I want to say how many students celebrated Christmas, what percent of students celebrated Christmas? Well, then I might need to be taking religious breakdown into consideration. But if I'm collecting data on eye color, well, whether you celebrate Christmas or not is not going to affect your eye color. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's different things we might need to be considering to know that we can make those inferences. Okay. We also have something to consider, which is bias. We've heard that word before. What does bias mean?
You're partial to one thing over the other.
Something is swaying the data. It's manipulating it, it's presenting it maybe not in its truth. Now, most of the time when my students hear the word bias, they think about it as a very purposeful action. Especially the day you guys live in, how many times have you heard over the last year, well, that news station is biased because? Right? Doesn't matter which side you're on, you've heard it. That's a purposeful manipulation of the data, which is bias, but it's not always purposeful. So for example, don't tell my husband I do this, but I do. Okay, here's a picture of my husband. You don't need to like ingrain it in your brain for forever. It's just, look at the picture, you'll see in a second. Okay, this is a picture of my husband, got it, got it? Okay, so let's say we want to collect data on bald men. Sorry, Sam. Is my husband bald?
Yep.
Okay, so Trey says yes. Do we all say yes? Anybody say,
He does
Yeah,
have
yeah.
hair.
Okay, not only does he have hair, my husband can grow hair, no problem. We just shave it all off. He doesn't care to deal with it, so we just buzz it off. Is my husband bald? So if we're going around collecting data on if someone is bald, we're going to have to make sure. Now, if you ask my husband that question, he would say, yeah, I'm bald. I don't care. Put it as bald. I have no hair on my head right now. Whereas someone else might be like, I don't want to be labeled as bald. I can grow hair. Okay, so sometimes bias comes up in how we ask a question, where we ask a question, who we ask a question. Bias is something we do not see. Okay, we have to really think about it. We can't always get rid of bias. Sometimes there is just bias happening. Let's say that I want to collect data on whether people prefer Coke or Pepsi. And I'm going to go ask 5,000 people. And I'm going to stand outside McDonald's and ask every single person that comes out the door. Is that okay? What might be weird about me doing that?
I'm just sure McDonald's, they each like only carry one product.
Right, so I'm standing out of a place that only carries one product. They only carry Coke. Right, what happens if, oh, I don't have my Coke cup out, but I'm asking people while I'm holding a Coke in my hand. I don't have any preference, whatever, Coke, right? So how we ask people is important. Are we clarifying what we want bulb to mean? Or is everybody interpreting it in their own saying and just giving an answer? Right? We don't always know. Those are things we have to think about. There isn't a perfect answer. There's never going to be a perfect answer, but those are just factors at play. Okay? Fallacy is another term that we need to think about. Fallacy is an error in reasoning usually based on a mistake. Oh, that was all spelled wrong. Can I say it? I don't know. Usually it's because we assume something that we shouldn't. Again, not always on purpose. Sometimes our brains just fill in holes that aren't there, and we just go along with it. Now, the two other big key terms were from your video notes yesterday. Causation versus correlation. What was a causation? A direct cause and effect. What's correlation?
They both like could change. Or they
There's more
both.
answers to it.
They have some type of relationship. Okay, we don't necessarily know why. There's something maybe going on there, but one doesn't have to cause the other. Okay, so for example, let's just say you're on social media. Okay, you're scrolling through something, and you see this fact, which is in fact true. I'm telling you a true statement. Okay? 80% of couples who go on a first date to a sushi restaurant end up having a second date. Okay, I'm telling you a factual statement. Data was collected. It says 80% of couples who go on a first date to a sushi restaurant end up having a second date. You're all looking at me weird. Why are you looking at me weird?
Let's see what dating and sushi has to do with it.
Okay, so whenever we hear data, now I'm throwing something at you in particular that's gonna make you start to think. I'm trying to give you one on purpose that makes you go, huh? What do sushi and dating have to do with each other? Okay, but the reality is whenever we hear data, we should start thinking that. What's really going on with this? What's really happening? So let's start talking through our options here. Now, I pulled this data using pre-existing data. But if we had to guess, how do we think this information was collected?
It takes couples who go to.
Do you think it was observational? Do you think it was an experiment? Do you think it was a survey? Survey. Okay, so we probably got a sample of people. What happens if we only asked 5 couples?
We're gonna get a really small sample size. Data's gonna be skewed.
So that data's not going to be super helpful, okay? But I'm going to tell you that we asked 5,000 people. Okay, so do we feel like that's helpful if we know we asked 5,000 people? That's going to be important. Okay, so our sample's a good sample. Okay, another thing that we might want to ask ourselves is, okay, is it a good sample? What types of people did they ask? I'm going to tell you, it's a good sample. We know it's a good sample. We should definitely be questioning it, but I'm going to tell you it's a good sample. And while there's always bias in a survey, I'm going to say the question was asked pretty clearly, so there's not too much we have to worry about there. So 80% of people who go to a sushi restaurant on a first date end up having a second date. That's still kind of curious. We're not seeing anything there. What else could be happening here? Well, let's talk. Hi, Edgar. Welcome to my class. I'm Mrs. McKinney. I like sushi. Hi, Trey. Welcome to class. I like sushi. Why are you like, what are you doing, Mrs. McKinney?
Socialize.
You're weird. That's definitely not even getting you a first date at all, right? That's going nowhere good. That's not normal. People don't talk like that. Okay, so if you're going on a first date with somebody and you don't know a whole lot about them, what's going to be a safe bet of a restaurant to go to?
Not sushi.
Okay, my students can usually agree on that. Not sushi. Why not?
Sushi is, if you don't like fish or raw fish, then like that's kind of all sushi.
Yeah, sushi is a pretty polarizing restaurant. Ava, what do you think might be more safe? Oh, did you have another statement you were going to say?
Well, I was gonna say, like, some people have, like, allergies, like shellfish.
Oh, yeah, definitely a bad idea. Don't want to kill the person on the first date or send them to the ER, right? So what might be a safe bet? What's a place that we might pick as safe?
Like burgers or pizza.
Okay, right, someplace that it's a more general. So maybe like a Texas Roadhouse. You can get a burger, you can get pasta, you can get a salad. Kind of something for everyone, right? Sushi? Not for everyone. Okay, so what are you gonna have to know about someone to be willing to go on a first date at a sushi restaurant?
No, I like sushi.
You're gonna have to know they like sushi. And do people walk up to you and say, oh, hi Trey, I'm Erin McKinney, nice to meet you, I like sushi. Does that happen? What usually happens before you know someone likes sushi? You have talked with them about other things. What types of things do you like? So maybe the statement is really saying that people who know more about each other are 80% chance of having a second date. Does that make way more sense? What did sushi have to do with it?
Nothing.
Nothing. Right? There was a correlation there. There's some relationship between going to sushi and getting a second date, but what's really happening is how well we know someone. Okay, so here's some other data. Research was published, this has now been several years ago, about a medical treatment for ovarian cancer, and saying that this medical treatment would work for ovarian cancer. Okay, so you read the introduction to the article, everything looks promising. You can treat this ovarian cancer with this type of chemotherapy. But then you start looking at the details. Okay, so we start thinking about the other terms that we've asked. Sample. The number of people that were sampled were 7.
That's a bit iffy.
Okay, but we have to start somewhere. Okay, so we start with 7. We have to start somewhere. Let's keep going down our list. So, how was this survey probably done?
Experiment.
An experiment, right? We're sort of manipulating to see the outcome. Who was sampled?
People who had cancer.
7 people. And those 7 people were all males.
Wait.
What's wrong about that?
They don't have ovaries.
Yes, they do not have ovaries, do they? Right? So, statement seems promising. Research seems promising. Sample, not good. Now, ladies, unfortunately, that's how medical treatment was done for us. And experiments were done within the last 100 years. Women were not involved, it was men. That's kind of problematic, right? But that's how it's been done. I didn't make the rules, we just followed them. So that's the type of thoughts that we want to be having as we're moving forward. How can we consider and look at all of these terms to see what else might be something we need to consider? Does that make sense? Did you have a question, Lily?